Yes, okay. So we are, okay, quickly what we have here is, so today and tomorrow's Gemara still we are talking about agriculture and regarding how you work out the years that the fruits or the vegetables or the grains or the legumes that they fall in. And this is necessary to know as to what kind of meiser you have to give. Because the first and second year, apart from the Maisa you give to the Levi every year in the 6 years, the first and second year and the fourth and fifth year, you take it with you to the Shalayim, Maisa Sheni, but on the third and sixth year, it is Maisa Ani. So it's very important to work that out. And separate to that, you also have the year of Shemitah. So therefore, we had 4 different categories. And basically, we said as follows. When it comes to vegetables, we look at the time that they are harvested, when you collect them and bring them in. It's called Basar Lekita. That's when it comes to vegetables. When it comes to grains and oil and wine, there we say if it's a third ready, shlish. If it's a third ready, then that's the year that it's considered that as if it grew. Because it can eat it already then if you really want to. And then we say when it comes to legumes, it's Bashar Hashrasha, when they take root in the ground. When it comes to the fruits on a tree, we say Basar Chanota, when it begins to blossom. Because the sap in the trees is collected from the water, and it takes a while for the water to travel up the tree, and then that sap is what gives the nourishment to the fruits. So whatever the fruits grow from then on is from last year's water. So we are up to the Gemara here, about 10 lines to the top of the page. Tanya Rabbi Yossi Hagluli Omer. We learned in a Brisa. Rabbi Yossi Hagluli says, it says in the pasuk regarding Sukkos, that be'asvacha at the time when you collect migorancha or mikvecha, the time that you collect from your threshing floor or mikvecha from your wine vats. So we're going to make a comparison, and we're going to say, ma goyden be'yekef. The whole idea of giving ma'aser to vegetables is only from the rabbanon, only from the rabbis. Mahatoida, you give, from the grains, the wine and the oil, but vegetables is only midrabbanon. When it comes to fruits on a tree, there's a machlekes between the Rambam, who follows the Sifri, that it's Mahatera, and others that say it's only Rabban. So when the Chachamim said that for vegetables, and they decided that it's the time when you collect it, where did they learn it from? They always tried to find some kind of a basis in the Torah to make some kind of an asmachta. So they made an asmachta that it's like the goyden and the yekef, just like when you give truma from the goyden from your threshing floor and the grains and your wine vat, and this is how over there. What do we know? We know that if it's a third ready, that's the year that it's considered that it grew in, and that's when we follow the mices of that particular year. So therefore, we'll say the same thing over here. So, but ma goyden v'yekef. What do we know about Goyden Yaakov? The reason why we say the third is because the third is the bulk of it growing, and it all grew on last year's water. So therefore, that's the year that we consider that it grew in. So if it grew, let's say, in year number 3, and they are third, and then it will continue in year number 4, the water that it used, the majority of the water came from the third year. So therefore, and therefore the Maisa is considered the year that it grew up to a third, that it grew a third. So anything else that grows on last year's water is considered as if it's last year's produce, and therefore it goes on the previous year. The exception is vegetables. Why? Yotzi Yerokis, the exception is vegetables. Shegdeilin al meishana habo, that they continue growing with the water from this year as well, because even if you would cut the vegetables, they start growing straight away again, which means it's not just last year's water, it continues growing into this year. And that's why by vegetables we follow the Lakita. Umisasin l'shana haba. And therefore the Maisa is considered the current year, not of last year. Everything else grew from last year's water. You cut it, it doesn't grow straight away again. That's the way for the right season. And over here, by vegetables, it continuously grows. So therefore it's growing with this year's water as well. That's why we go Basar Lekita this year. Rabbi Kiva says the same thing, but the outcome is the same, but he compares it slightly different. Kiva says,
where are we holding at the moment, sorry?
to when you gathered your granary, your grains and everything else. Ma goyim v'yeket. What's so unique about them? Yuchadim. They are unique. Shegidelin al roiv mayim. They grow basically rainwater, and that's sufficient. And therefore, misasin l'shana she'avra. And therefore, the mice is based on the initial rainwater that it used to grow, as long as it's the third ready. Av kol shegidelin al roiv mayim. Therefore, anything else that grows on rainwater, misasin l'shana she'avra, goes in the previous year. Yotzu, the exception is yerakis, vegetables. Shegidelin al kol mayim. That you don't only use rainwater, you also use irrigated water, and you continuously have to irrigate it and to water it. Therefore, misasin l'shana haba, it's different than grains, and therefore we look at the current year, and that's how it works. Says the Gemara, at the end of the day, my benayu.
Where are we holding?
Because you compare rainwater versus old water, or whether we compare most of the water to where it happened before, or whether the water still continues right now. What's the difference? I'm going to be Abu. Abu said, tell you what the difference is. What about Bitzolim Hasarisim?
1492.
Thanks.
What about Bitzolim Hasarisim? These are miniature onions that will never grow very large. Or Pul Hamitzi, an Egyptian bean. Ike Benayu. That is the difference between them. What do you mean? Now we learned Bitzolim Hasarisim, these mini onions. Or Pul Hamitzi, this Egyptian bean. And we learned before that Egyptian bean, it depends what the purpose is. Is it purpose is to eat the seeds? Or the purpose is to leave. If you eat the seed, then it's like legumes. And we look at the time it takes root, like kidneys. If it's for the leaves, then it's like vegetables. And we say shas lekita. What happened? Shemona mehen mayim shloishim yom lifnei Rosh Hashana. For 30 days before Rosh Hashana, you didn't provide it any water. Is misasin l'sha'avar. They still get ma'aseh from the past, because whatever water they received before the 30 days is what basically sustains them, so they're part of the past. Umutarin b'shvis, and they're not considered as if they grew in the year of Shemitah. If they grew in the 6th year, they're not considered as if they grew in the year of Shemitah, because we look at the water of the past. Lav, but if not, let's say they're not asurin b'shvis, and umisasin l'shana haba. And if it grew into the 7th year, then it's considered part of Shemitah. So Rabbi Yossi Haglila is the one that says you look at the water from the last year, and therefore if it stopped 30 days before and it continued, it's good enough. However, but Rabbi Akiva says that the difference of vegetables and everything else is that vegetables can grow in any water, not just rainwater, also irrigated water. Then it doesn't matter you stop the water 30 days before. We look at vegetables collectively, and therefore can still grow in irrigated water today. So it's considered like a 7th year plant. And it's considered like a 7th year plant. Therefore, you don't give Maisa in the previous year, you give Maisa in the current year, or if it's a Shemitah, it has all the dinim of Shemitah. Okay. Then we learned in the Mishnah, Echad B'Shvat, Rosh Hashana L'Ilam. When it comes to determine the Rosh Hashana of trees, it's the first day of Shvat. And we want to know, where does Shvat come into the picture? Why Shvat? My time, why Shvat? Amar Rabbi Lazar, and there's an argument B'Sham B'Sil. B'Shamai says it's the first day of Shvat, Rosh Hashana for the trees, and B'Sil says it's the 15th day of Shvat. So this is even though there's an Arla, and you had 3 years of Arla, you cannot eat the new fruits in the 5th year straight away. Rosh Hashana and Tishrei, you have to wait till either Echad B'Shvat or Tu B'Shvat. Now, what's so special about Shvat? So Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Ishia, Hoyel since the Yotzu Roiv Gishmei Shana. The rain season starts from Yud Zayin Cheshvan, and it goes on till Nisan. And since most of the rain season already has gone by the time you get to Tu B'Shvat, so therefore it's considered that's the Rosh Hashanah when it moves into the new year. But on the other hand, so that's where it comes in. But that's what most of the rain season is. And therefore we say the sap entered the tree, and that therefore nurtures all the fruits. So if it blossomed before then, that's in the past, and if it blossomed after then, it's the new year. Says the Gemara, but then he says, seems to be contradicting himself. About dying, we should know that there still remains outstanding because the rain season doesn't end till Nisan, and you should know that the majority of the rain season hasn't happened yet. Says, you want a mic comment? What are you trying to say? You seem like you're contradicting yourself. You're trying to say that the reason why Tu B'Shvat is considered a tipping point of the Rosh Hashanah is because most of the rainwater already occurred. And then you tell me, but no, the most of the rainwater is still about to occur. Hachikam, this is what he's saying. He's saying that even though the majority of the rainwater is still outstanding, since most of the Gishmei Shana already happened, therefore it's all right. Since most of the rain already happened, even though there's still quite a bit of outstanding, Rosh Hashanah, Tu B'Shvat is considered Rosh Hashanah. Okay, says we learned. Now we're going to focus on a little incident, trying to understand Rabbi Akiva's motives. Ma'aseh Rabbi Akiva, what's happened, Rabbi Akiva, sheliket esrog be'echad b'Shvat. He once picked an esrog on the first day of Shvat. And now, according to Beis Shammai, that's already considered the new year. According to Beis Hillel, it's still part of last year until Tu B'Shvat. And the Noag bo Shnei Yisurim. So therefore, he conducted 2 different years Meiser. The second year Meiser is Meiser Sheni. The third year Meiser is Meiser Oni. So he did both. Echad Kedibra Beis Shammai. One to satisfy the way we understood Rabbi Akiva's motives was, one was to follow the Shammai. Maybe it's considered a new year, so it's the third year, and therefore it's Meiser Oni. And the Echad Kedibra Beis Hillel, but maybe Beis Hillel is right, and it's Tu B'Shvat, so it's still last year Meiser Sheni. Traces already says, not like Rashi, he didn't give 2 sets of Meiser, 20%, because it says also you're not allowed to give too much Meiser. And if you give too much Meiser, it's worthless. So what he did was he actually only gave 10% Meiser Sheni. First he gave Meiser Sheni. He then redeemed it, and the money became holy, and the money he was going to bring with him to the shrine. And then the fruits he distributed to the poor. So with the same 10%, he did Meiser Sheni and he did Meiser Ani. That's how the first Tana understood Rabbi Akiva's motives. Comes along Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, he says no. Loi minig Beis Shammai Beis Hillel nobo. It wasn't a question of Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, whether it's the last year's produce or whether it's this year's. Elaminig Rabbi Gamliel Rabbi Lezer nobo. He was unsure about a different argument between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer. And what's that? We'll have a mini kedusha as well. Now we learned. Esrig you would think is a fruit. But on the other hand, it has a certain quality like a vegetable. It can stay on the tree for a very long time. We had more sukkah, but hey, it can stay on the tree for a number of years. So therefore, halachically, according to the first Tana here, Rabbi Gamliel, esrig shava le'ilan. Esrig has the same laws as a tree, begimel drachim in 3 respects. But liyereg b'dereg echad, in 1 respect, it's like a vegetable. We treat it like a vegetable. What do you mean? In 3 ways. By an ilan, we look, when do we say the new year starts? By a tree, by fruits of a tree, when basa chanot, when it begins to blossom. We look at the fruits that begin to blossom, and then we say, so when did it blossom? Before Tu B'Shvat, after Tu B'Shvat. So 3 different ways regarding which dinim. Regarding Orla, if you want to determine Orla, we look at the fruits when it began to blossom. That's that's number 1. Ula Ravai, when it comes to the 4th year, when it began to blossom. And Uli Yerek, Uli Shviz. And when it comes to Shemitah, we look at the fruits, which year did it blossom in, and that's the year that it grew. But when Uli Yerek, but in 1 respect, it's like a vegetable. And how is that? When it comes to Meiser. When it comes to Meiser, not like Shemitah, you look at when the fruit blossom. When it comes to Meiser, we're going to treat an esrog just like a vegetable, which is what? Whenever you picked it. Shebeshas likutoi. The Meiser is the time that you picked it. So it doesn't matter when it blossomed. What matters is, so it blossomed in year number 2, you picked it in year number 3, it's considered a 3rd year fruit, like a vegetable. That's the view of Rabbi Gamliel. Comes along Rabbi Eliezer says, no. Esrig, Shavali, Ilah, L'chol Davar. I believe that Esrig is like a tree in every respect. Rabbi Eliezer said that an esrog is like a tree in every respect. That means even regarding Meiser, it's like a tree. If it blossomed in year number 2, it's considered a year number 2 fruit, and therefore what you give is Meiser Sheni, not Meiser Ani. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva decided he'll follow both. He will follow Rabbi Gamliel, he will follow Rabbi Eliezer, and he was machmer. So that's why he treated it like a year 2 fruit. Because maybe Rabbi Eliezer is right that it's like a tree you go after the blossoming, and he also treated like a year 3 fruit and gave my son. Maybe Rabbi Gamliel is right that it's like a vegetable. Says the Gemara, Where do you find that you're machmir two chumras which contradict each other? They both can't be right. It's either Rabbi Gamliel that you follow the time you picked it, or it's Rabbi Lezer that it's a time that it blossomed. It can't be both. And so what's wrong with being machmir like both? What Tanya we learned. We had this Gemara earlier. After we heard the voice that rang out from heaven, we know that the halacha is like Beis Hill. But prior to that, which way did we follow? Did we follow Beis Hill or did we follow Beis Shammai? So one of the follows. Prior to they made that ruling, whoever wanted to follow Beis Shammai can. And if somebody wanted to follow Beis Hill, they could follow Beis Hill. There were no set rules. If in every argument you decided to follow always the lenience, whoever's more lenient, that's the rabbi you're going to follow. Russia. That is basically a Russian. And because he sees Yiddishkeit as as a burden and he wants to get out of it. But actually, now what do you mean a Mekule Beis Shammai and Mekule Beis Hill is a Russian? Why is he a Russian? Why can't you go to one Rav for one, in Hilchos Shabbos, they go to another Rav, Hilchos Kashrus? You could. You're not a Russia in that respect at all. When you're a Russia is when there's an argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hill, and this very argument has ramifications of two different areas. In one area, Beis Shammai is the one who's stringent and Beis Hill is lenient. In the other area, the same argument is the other way around. And therefore, you decided that in this area, you'll follow the more lenient one, and that area more follow, and that is a Russia. What's the example that they have in the Gemara, Rashi? The example is the following. If two vertebrae are missing, let's say we know that if you have a body inside a house, then anything else inside that house that shares the same common roof becomes tamei, known as tumas oil, the tumah of the tent. If there's a skeleton formed there, and then again we say that it passes the tumah, transfers the tumah to whatever else is inside that tent, in that home. What happens if a vertebrae is missing? It's incomplete. The skeleton is incomplete. According to Beis Shammai, if only one vertebrae is missing, it's still considered a skull, a skeleton. If two vertebrae are missing, only then do we say it's no longer a complete skeleton and it's no longer generating tumah. Beis Hill says no. Even if one vertebrae is missing, it's incomplete. So in regards to the laws of tumah, Beis Shammai is stricter than Beis Hill. Beis Shammai says if one vertebrae is missing, it's still generating tumah. Beis Hill says no, one vertebrae is missing, it is tahor. So Beis Shammai is more stringent. But the same argument on the flip side is by treif. If an animal is treif and missing, if it's incomplete, it is treif. According to Beis Shammai, there's a leniency. If only one vertebrae is missing, it's not incomplete, it's complete, and therefore the animal is kosher. According to Beis Hill, if one vertebrae is missing, it is treif. So if somebody decides, when it comes to treif, I will paskin like Beis Shammai, one vertebrae is missing, the animal is kosher. But when it comes to tumah, I'm going to paskin like Beis Hill, that one vertebrae is missing, it's incomplete, and doesn't generate tumah, that's called a rasha. Because it can't be both. One of them is definitely wrong. But as Rashi explains, but if in the area of Shabbos, I want to ask one Rav, and the area of Kashrus, I ask another Rav, and I know that Rav is lenient in Kashrus, and I know this Rav is lenient in Shabbos, you may do that. You're not called a rasha at all. However, the Gemara continues. What happens? In this particular example I just gave you, they decide, you know what? When it comes to tumah, I'll be machmer like Shammai. When it comes to kashrus, I'll be machmer like Hill. If one vertebrae is missing, the animal is kosher. I want to be machmer. All of our kosher, regarding him, we say, he's not a rasha, he's being machmer. But he's a fool, because he cannot be both. You can't be both. If you're going to follow one way by tumah, then you have to follow by kashrus the same way. You cannot swap. Otherwise, it's foolish. Ella ike Beis Shammai. You want to follow Beis Shammai, no problem. Bikulei chumrein. Take all the stringencies and all the chumras. And ike Beis Hill bikulei chumrein. So the Beis Hill in the kulas and the chumras. So what's going on here? How can Rabbi Akiva, follow both? Or the first Tana said he follows the chumra Beis Shammai and the chumra Beis Hill. How can that be? How can you follow both Beis Shammai and Beis Hill? They're arguing with each other. Says the Gemara. What happened was actually Rabbi Akiva Gemara is top of it. Rabbi Akiva definitely wants to follow Basil. He was a student of Lezman Hurkinus, who was a student of Yechim Zakai, who was a student of Hill. He definitely wanted to follow Hill, but he just didn't know what Hill actually said. He wasn't certain. He didn't know. He didn't know Basil holds on the first day of Shvat Roshana or the 15th day of Shvat Roshana. That is why he was machmer. Now that makes sense. Now, Rabbi Yosi Bar Yehuda said, we learned at the top of the page. No, it has nothing to do with Sham and Hill. It has more to do with whether it's considered an esrog. It's considered a vegetable for Meiser, and therefore we follow the time that you picked it, which is, let's say, year number 3. Or is it like a fruit completely, and therefore we follow what a blossom that's year number 2? That's what Rabbi Yehuda said. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. He didn't follow Bisham. He followed. Now let's think for a second. When did he pick the fruit? On the first day of Shvat. Now, if we go after picking, then it's considered the 3rd year. If you go after when it blossomed, it's the 2nd year. That means he passed him like Bisham. Because according to Beis Hill, even if you follow the time that you picked it, it was the first day of Shvat. And according to Beis Hill, it's still considered part of last year. How can Rabbi Akiva rule like Beis Shammai? So ask the Gemara. Nog ba be'echad b'shvat. So Elamini Rabbi Gamliel nog ba be'echad b'shvat ki Beis Shammai nog ba. How can you follow Beis Shammai? Because even if you say the time of picking, the picking was the first day of Shvat. That's still part of last year. Amar Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chanina said, "V'yitem Rabbi Chanina. Hoch over here, we're talking about, you misunderstood. We're talking about an esrog shechontu peiros of koidem tezvav the idach. They blossomed. Remember, an esrog can remain on a tree for a while. They blossomed on the tree, not in the last couple of months. Last year before Tu B'Shvat. So it blossomed in year number, let's say number 2, and you picked it on the first day of Shvat. So according to Beis Hillel, first day of Shvat is considered this year or last year. But it blossomed the year before that. And that's the question. Do you go after the blossoming or the picking? The Eid truth be told, it didn't have to pick it the first day of Shvat. It could have been any time post Tu B'Shvat of last year, would have the same question. Do you go after the picking, which is the year after Tu B'Shvat, or do you go after when it blossomed the year before Tu B'Shvat? But Ma'aseh Shahaya Kachayu, just telling you a fact. The fact was that Rabbi Akiva picked on the first day of Shvat, and therefore the question is, what do you do with it? Why would he pick an esrog the first day of Shvat when you still have another 9 months to go till Sukkot? What was the point of that?
Maybe you just want to eat it.
Yeah, maybe not much to eat in an esrog.
Mrs. Hillel wanted to make some jam.
Oh, okay.
Mrs. Rabbi Akiva.
This is Rabbi Akiva. Yes. Says the Gemara, another answer. Ravina says, you think that Rabbi Yosi Bar Yehuda is talking about a case where the fruits blossomed prior to Tu B'Shvat a year ago, and then you picked it post that and just happened to be on the Chodesh Shvat. I'll tell you better. Rabbi Yosi Bar Chanina holds that in fact he argues on both points. Kroich v'toni, learn them together. In fact, he has 2 arguments here. First of all, he says the story never happened. It wasn't even that first day Shvat. He's arguing on the facts of the story. The story happened on the 15th day of Shvat, not the first day, and we're following Hillel. And according to Hillel, 15th day of Shvat is a brand new year. And the second thing I'm arguing about is not because he was concerned about Beis Shammai. He didn't acknowledge Beis Shammai's opinion. But what was he was worried about the other argument between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Lezer, whether an esrog is considered a vegetable or considered a fruit. Amar Rabbi Barahuna hashed now the Amar Rabbi Gamliel esrog achalikitosa yisuda. It comes when Rabbi Barahuna said. So what did Rabbi Gamliel say? Rabbi Gamliel said on esrog, when it comes to meiser, at least we don't look at when it blossomed. We look at when you picked it. So therefore. Is kiyere like a vegetable, so Rosh Hashana Shaloi Tishra. All fruits, we said Rosh Hashana Tu B'Shvat. But when it comes to Ma'aseh, so first of all, we have to know which year it's in. We just decided, right? We go after when you picked it. But when does Rosh Hashana start? Because we're treating it like a vegetable, then the Rosh Hashana of the new year for it should be just like a vegetable, which is when Rosh Hashana and Tishrei. So therefore, he says it should be Tishrei. That's a question. Rav Shimon ben Elazar says, "Likate esrig erev Tu B'Shvat." Rav Shimon ben Elazar said, if you picked an esrig right before Tu B'Shvat, which is by fruits, it's considered part of last year. Adjalei Tovei Hashem, before the sun set. Then the chazar, we're talking about an esrig now. Then the chazar v'likate mishet Tovei Hashem, and then you pick afterwards. Ain termim ma'asin, no, you picked some before sunset, you picked some afterwards, and I hold like Rabbi Gamliel, we look at the time of picking. So what do? You have to make sure that you don't mix the two esrogim together. You got to keep the meiser separate. Ain termim ma'asin mezeh. You don't get true a meiser from those esrogim that you picked post Tu B'Shvat on those esrogim you picked prior to B'Shvat. So which opinion does Rav Shimon Elazar follow? He follows on esrog is you look at the time when you picked it, like Rabbi Gamliel. And yet he says, when is Rosh Hashana? Not Tishrei, but Tu B'Shvat. Even though in one respect it's like a vegetable, to whether we go after the time that it blossomed, the time that you picked it, but when it comes to determine when the year begins, we don't go back to Rosh Hashana. It's like any other fruit on Tu B'Shvat. And the reason why you have to be careful, you don't mix the two esrogim together, is you do not give truma ma'aser last year's crop on this year's, not this year's crop on last year. So we see that Tu B'Shvat is considered the beginning of the year. And then he continues there. If the third year goes into the fourth year, he gives you examples now. Let's say it was the third year before Tu B'Shvat and it's the fourth year after Tu B'Shvat. So Shlishis, those esrogim you picked in the third year, those before Tu B'Shvat, before sunset Tu B'Shvat, Ma'aser Rishon u'Ma'aser Ani, because that's the law of the third year, and Revius, and those that you picked post Tu B'Shvat is Ma'aser Rishon and Ma'aser Sheni. Now we're leading to our question on Rav. Man Shamadle, who is the one who said? The Azil Basal Lekita, who is the one that you said that you look at the time of picking is Rabbi Gamliel, and you Rabbi Barahuna said that the Rosh Hashana for it is Tishrei, and yet it says clearly Tani Shvat that the years turn over in Shvat. Elid Marachim. If you want to learn, I'll tell you how to learn. Amar Rabbi Barahuna. Rabbi Barahuna said, this is what actually he said. You misunderstood. Even though Gamliel said that an esrog after you picked it is just like a vegetable as far as the mice is concerned, that we go after the time that you picked it. But the Rosh Hashana Shalom, when does the new year begin? Dafke in Shvat. Says he about one last question. Why is it that earlier on the previous brisa that we learned, where we wanted to give an example of 2 different years? We give example. It says the third year and the second year and the third year. And why over here you give an example by this case of esrog is the third year into the fourth year? Why? Says the Gemara. Why is over there? We had a few days ago. The Tony says im hoisa shnia nichneses l'shlishis of the second year goes to the third year. So therefore, it depends which year we follow. Second year, third year. Why this brisa was given an example regarding the esrog? When we talk about the esrog, he used an example of third year going into the fourth year. The Gemara is being a bit pedantic here, but why? Why change? Says the Gemara. Usually we talk about second year, third year because the first 2 years the meiser is the same. It's meiser sheni. When does it vary? The second to the third. The third year it's Meiser Ani, the second year Meiser Sheni. So it makes sense why we always use that as an example, second and third year. But why then you jump and you go third to fourth year, which you go right back? So Meiser Ani is the third year, and Meiser Sheni back to the fourth year. Why did you do that? Says you want to milsa agav uchik kamasha. I want to teach you something just by the way, and that is the esrig kashule yada. The esrig people constantly touch, and therefore it's harmful. You have to be very, very careful with an esrig tree. It's very, very delicate. And because people are constantly touching the tree, is the year of Shemitah when everything is ownerless, hefker. It's a hefkeris. Everybody walks around and touches. People go, even the esrog trees, which are so expensive, people touching it. By doing that, they harm the tree. And now for the esrog tree to once again bear new esrogim, it takes a minimum of 3 years post Shemitah after the people harm the tree for the new esrogim to grow. And therefore, it tells you from the third year to the fourth year. Now, why exactly do we need to know that? I'm not sure. But just telling you a fact that esrogim take a long time to grow. And especially if you touch the tree, you don't take care of it properly, it takes a good 3 years before it's full of spring. Okay, anyway, one more blot of this, and then we go back a little bit to Rosh Hashanah before we talk about other things. Anyway, everyone should have a short time.